fundamentally, you have to start with the idea that it's well beyond profits. And yet the model has to be profitable in order to be also sustainable. A business model, there has to be profit to enable a sustainable approach to continue over time. But you have to look at the benefits that you are creating, right, by being in business. And then benefits to whom?
Like there's no business that we don't get raw materials, raw ingredients from nature, and there's no business really that doesn't put out something into nature because we're living on this planet. And so I think addressing that, acknowledging that and saying, okay, well, we're really trying to just survive on this planet. Our businesses are helping us survive and helping this economy thrive. So how do we acknowledge that we're living on this planet and have this planet-centric outlook?
Hello, everybody, and welcome. Today, we are going to unpack a very interesting conversation that looks at economic recovery with a nature-positive lens. This is part of a conversation series that's brought to you by the Center for a Smart Future together with Echelon. And today's conversation dives into understanding what does business models in this context look like? How can we reimagine the recovery of our economy through a more holistic angle, through an angle that looks at business models in a way that is nature positive? How do we bring in nature to the very core of our business, which is going to benefit the planet and the people while we make a profit with the services and the products we bring out of this economy? And as part of that conversation today, we are going into the topic of business models, which are nature positive, and how can this be understood in a Sri Lankan context and in fact impact Sri Lanka's economic growth as we move forward. So joining me in this conversation is two very special individuals. I'll start with Savera Weerasinghe, who ran a packaging manufacturing company in Sri Lanka and founded a sustainable packaging startup here. And now she's based in Singapore as a global consultant on circular economy, as well as working with NUS's environmental policy think tank. And previously, Savera worked at the UNDP and South Pole as well. Also, we have Arj Wignaraja in the house. He's a dynamic professional who thrives in the intricate world of business with purpose. He has extensive experience as a strategy consultant with roles at firms like BCG, and he's also the founder of the Stacks Asia office, and he's an advisor and a former vice president to Service Frontier. Today, he serves as a director of GoodLifeX and also as a trusted advisor to prominent entities like Bartlett & Co., Asia Securities, Senmetrics, Timex, and Servio. So welcome both of you, and excited to dive into this conversation with you both. Before we get into the specifics of what exactly is a nature-positive business model, let's try to understand what nature positivity is to begin with, and why are we having this conversation today by connecting nature positivity and business models? Why is it relevant today? So in this light, I think what's important to understand is this is not about creating less damage or reducing the amount of damage that we do, but how do we add more than we take? So in that context, I'll begin with you, Savera. Why is it important at a time like this that we look at these challenges from the perspective of business?
As you said, we are at a critical juncture. And if you look at why we're at a critical juncture, it's because, there's climate collapse, where there's a lot of things going on with our natural living ecology that we need to address, because we're at this juncture where it's affecting our economies, it's affecting societies, it's affecting geopolitics. And so at this juncture, we have to ask ourselves, why are we here? And I think it's really fundamentally to do with the fact that businesses and, market forces that drive businesses are externalizing the environment. For a long time, we've created business models that are completely driven by market forces or these drivers that don't consider the environment. And so now I think we're at this juncture where we have to say things need to change because it's affecting all of us across the boards. And so I think looking at this kind of climate collapse, which has really been caused by an extractive mentality that is kind of drawn into all our business models and an economic system. How can we do things differently? How can we take this externality, which is the environment, and internalize it? Because there's really no business that doesn't take from nature, right? Like there's no business that we don't get raw materials, raw ingredients from nature, and there's no business really that doesn't put out something into nature, because we're living on this planet. And so I think addressing that, acknowledging that, and saying, okay, well, we're really trying to just survive on this planet. Our businesses are helping us survive and helping this economy thrive. So how do we acknowledge that we're living on this planet and bring the planet, have this planet-centric outlook? And I think that's where this conversation for a nature positive economy stems from.
And I think the other challenge is that right now, we're looking at how do we recover, right? Particularly in the Sri Lankan context. We're in a deep hole. So it seems that the easy wins, right, the low-hanging fruit, let's push open the gates for tourism, make it a lot easier for people to come in, even on agriculture. Let's open up and clear out more forest land and bring in sort of monoculture, large plantations because those are easy for, forex earnings. So there's a real danger that we latch on to something that we think is going to get us out of the challenges we're in, but it's deeply harmful on a medium-term and long-term basis. Yeah. So that's why I think this is a moment to really rethink and reflect on the models that will take us out of the abyss and then beyond. So I think it's really a pivotal moment to rethink a lot of the models that we are thinking about.
And when we are reimagining, also, we have to acknowledge the fact that it's not only Sri Lanka that is in a crisis right now. At a global level, there's multiple interconnected issues that we are dealing with that we didn't imagine we'll deal with in this century, in this year. But also when we are reimagining, isn't it important that we actually try to shift from a point of extractive mentality into a mentality of really regenerating and a mentality of scarcity into abundance? Do you think that has a role to play here?
Absolutely. And I think, also acknowledging the cognitive dissonance, right? Like we talk about tourism and we're attracting people because of this beautiful island that we're on. But we don't understand the harm that if we're not considering it, taking into consideration, or agriculture, it's literally we're taking from the land, but not acknowledging all the detriment to the land. How do we change this focus and understand that, we are an abundant island, it's an abundant environment. But if we have this kind of scarcity mindset where we take without understanding where it goes, for example, or without understanding, the cyclical nature of nature, I think we're losing out because we're just taking, but where does it go? It just comes back to bite us. And I think that is something that we definitely need to acknowledge, and systemically we have to, across the boards. And I think there's a huge opportunity for Sri Lanka to really position itself, because if you look at even on global regulation that's coming in, they're just starting to look at this and position it. If we really want to stay ahead of the curve and we're at this juncture of transformation, we really need to address this and say, this is our greatest resource. Our living ecology is our greatest resource. How do we put that at the center of everything we do and move forward?
And that disconnect also is, we're charging a tourist $35, $50, $100 for a particular experience. And, the result of really just pushing through and overcrowding and allowing behaviors, at each of these biodiversity hotspots or our natural, the forests, it really undermines the positioning.
Yes.
Right. So it's literally, so it's not a $35 or a $50 or a $100 experience. You're converting it into a $5 experience. And you can't do that over, 2-3 cycles. People, very quickly are going to figure out this is not value for money. This is not the experience that I anticipated. So we have to really kind of figure this balance and undo that damage. And absolutely, that's.
I mean, there's no regulation on, for example, there's a barrier to get in. Say you charge a lot to get into the park, but there's no regulation on any of, say, the hotels or businesses on the outskirts of the park that are, dumping or taking water, or where the water goes, or where the grey water goes, or any of this regulation that's going to directly harm the thing that you're trying to
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much
get money from.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that thinking, I think, needs a change, where if all of these businesses were saying, okay, this is our main resource, this is really what we're selling, how do we become custodians of it? How do our business models look at custodianship of this? We bring in people to say, here's how we are caregivers, here's how we nurture this. I think that's where we need to start heading.
Yeah. And moving into understanding a little bit about what does a nature positive business model look like. I think we all started with the examples of agriculture and tourism. So I want to, pose this to Arj. Is there a specific industry that these kind of models are more relevant to, or is it actually sector agnostic? Is it relevant to everybody?
I think the answer is, of course, it is relevant to everybody, but conceptually, I think it's harder for people who are, let's say, further away from the soil, further away from kind of nature, to kind of imagine the impact or the thinking. How does it apply to their own businesses, right? So for companies that are in, let's say, food and agriculture, there is a clearer understanding that, what you put in and what you get out of the soil, how do you ensure that, no poisons are going in, which is sort of basic, right? No, organic is basic, but then beyond organic, to really think even monoculture organic is hurting the soil over time. So then you think of, and we've had this knowledge, right, in our wisdom, in our ancient history, this idea of agroforestry, the Candian canopy system. So for those kind of entities, it's closer, that knowledge, and they can access it. But then when you go into, IT companies, for them, they wouldn't even think of themselves as being extractive, or they think their footprint is very small, right? We've got some servers, we've got some laptops, and now, hey, our people are working from home, so even that whole commuting cost or damage is reduced. But, as someone pointed out yesterday, you're storing stuff in the cloud.
Yes.
Well, behind, on the cloud is not some magical genie, right? There's huge server farms, there's huge mining operations to support those servers and infrastructure. None of that is factored in as being damaging or extracting. So we don't even factor that into our thinking. So I think there is a educative aspect of pointing out and helping people understand this is the impact, this is what you're extracting. And I think once there's clarity, it's not to put them on the defensive. I think people will then respond in ways that say, okay, we can't not use a cloud. There's no solution for that. But at a minimum, you start with certain offsets, or you try to improve certain practices, try and balance it. And then over time, how do you reduce the damaging effects for IT companies, right? So we have to bring them to that thinking to say, we are all, like you said, Savera, we are all extractive by existing.
Yes.
And then how do we try to put more back in?
And I think that conversation is already coming in with, say, you look at the GHG protocols and how, companies have to account for their carbon footprint. Now they're going into scope 3 emissions, which means that no one is free of looking at that footprint, right? Because everything is connected. So when we start accounting in that way, you see that, there's really no human on this planet that is devoid of a dependence on the planet. So when we start looking at it like that, and then understanding, okay, where does this come from? Where does this go? I think then that shift has to take place. Right now, I think we're burdened with this kind of less bad, or this net zero kind of mindset of, we have these emissions, we're creating waste. How do we get to this net zero kind of less bad? But I think if we shift that and say, what is at the core of this business, where is this actually coming from and where is this going, and trying to actually acknowledge it as opposed to just, put a band-aid on the really bad things that you're doing. I think that's the mindset that needs to shift, and that is across the boards. Definitely, it's much more intuitive and kind of in your face when you are directly relying on ecology. But, you go through services, IT, there's really nothing that is spared. There's no one that can live in isolation or in this insular way. So I think then looking at that and say, okay, how do we connect, and how are we connected to the planet? It also makes you become custodians of your people. Right? Because there is some reliance. You're just, I think, acknowledging your dependency, your interdependency, your relationship. And then it's a question of how are we in right relation with everyone, with everything. And what is my business's role within a very large ecosystem? Yeah. I think those are the questions we need to start asking ourselves, because we're already in crisis.
I think in science, we all learn and look at life and life on Earth as a living system.
Yeah.
But in business, however, we act as if we are in isolation.
Yeah.
It's a single player game.
Yeah.
And even when it comes to topics like nature positivity, not in this frame, but what's out there in the world, and sustainability, it's again a list of boxes to tick.
Yes.
It's about, okay, I'm complying by this, and this, I'm okay. If we take a look at the business model of being nature positive, it's a much more holistic approach to how do I give back more than I take? How do I change the way I operate in itself? So Arj, on that perspective, how is a nature positive business model different to a conventional business model?
Yeah, I think fundamentally you have to start with the idea that it's well beyond profits, right? And yet the model has to be profitable in order to be also sustainable, right? So a business model, there has to be profit to enable a sustainable approach to continue over time. But you have to look at the benefits that you are creating, right, by being in business. And then benefits to whom? So yes, for the founder or the shareholder, there has to be some benefit and return. Right? And that can come in multiple ways besides monetary, but there has to be also a monetary return to enable them to continue doing what they're doing. But beyond that, what are the benefits to the planet? Right? We're talking nature positivity. What are the benefits that we are creating to the planet, to our communities, wherever we are choosing to do business? What are the benefits of us being there? With our resources, with our skill set, our know-how, how are we benefiting the community that we are working with? Then our people. So again, to me, when we think nature positive, I think we humans are very much part of this discussion as well. So in terms of what are the benefits to our people, how are they learning and growing, and building a life that is productive, but again, ideally not in a model that is also just about the pursuit of wealth, right, and assets. So you have to think of these multiple levels of benefits, and then you have to think of the investments I need to make to provide those benefits, right? So those benefits don't just take place, but there is a true investments that we need to make to ensure these benefits. I can't make those investments unless I have customers and clients and business partners who are willing to recognize the good I'm doing and pay me for that. And we can use the word a premium. So when you think of the business models around it has to connect, right? And you talk about connecting the dots, right? So I think in that, which is why we worked on and thought through our business model canvas, and we call it Thrive, because it had a lens of both being regenerative, which is putting more back than you take out, and inclusive. I think that's the other element when we talk about an inclusive business model that shares more of the value created with all of the participants, right? And these are concepts, it's not charity. It's not charity. It's not a top-down paternalistic kind of model or thinking, but it's coming from a very different place.
I think it's true accounting, right? You're really taking not just, okay, this is labor and there we pay a wage for labor. It's what is this human putting in? What are we taking from? It's true accounting, not just picking and choosing so that we can keep our costs down and our profits high. It's if you take that all of what you've actually taken and saying, okay, we want to put back. It's, as you said, regenerative or restorative, right? We put back and then some. So we're really trying to go for net positive, and how do we get there? So I think it's going to this full, true, honest accounting, in which we don't really have systems
and
for.
I think we latch on to concepts like a fair wage.
Yeah.
Somebody somewhere drew a line and said,
This is okay.
$3.50 a day or something is a fair wage, right? And then, that makes us feel good, maybe that, we are paying, above fair wage. But it doesn't truly account for what the inputs that person is bringing, the contribution they make.
That's why, I was going to say, that's why I love the name of your canvas, because it's Thrive, right? Like, what will enable us to thrive? And that there is a really sweet spot. If you look to nature, ecosystems are symbiotic. There is this, you thrive and I thrive. Like, I give as much as I take and then some. And that's what kind of boosts and makes an ecosystem and all of the organisms within it thrive. Now, can we have those interactions? Because we know through, again, nature, if you have this individual mindset of like, Randhula, you were saying, like, with these businesses, if to transition away from single-use plastic, or that's kind of the sphere I've been in, the number one thing that any business, large or small, would say is, but that will be such a cost for me.
Yes.
But, really they're trying to do it not for the greater good. Right? Because they have to, because we're coming at a critical juncture where action needs to be taken. But then when it comes to taking the action, it's on a very individual, insular level that you're looking at the cost. But if you open that up to the ecosystem, says, how do we kind of work together? What is actually the true cost of this? I'm trying to be a business, say a restaurant or a hotel on a coast. I'm trying to sell a beautiful, pristine coast, but I'm not accounting for the single-use plastic that I put somewhere. So like, if you start opening out our lens and saying, we're all in right relation, and this is actually the true cost of everything I take, how do you put it back in a way that everyone mutually thrives? I think that's the mindset.
That collaborative mindset.
Yeah. We were talking on the topic of minimum wage and single-use plastics and dumping it somewhere. I think all of this comes from the same place of acting as if this is a transactional thing. It's not a nurturing role that you have to play. You just take to make something that's going to give something back to you. But it's not really looking at the web of interconnected ripple effects that we create by existing as a business. So on that, Savera, I want to also draw a little bit from your international experience.
Okay.
What are a few areas that you've noticed that businesses are trying to shift towards, especially in the scale of small and medium scale businesses in a global sense, to adopt into more sustainable or regenerative business models?
Yeah, the example I use all of the time, again, because I've been in this kind of single-use plastic circular economy space for a while, is a coalition of businesses that are regenerative or kind of spearheaded by a business called Numiti. They start off as being organic, but then really we're trying to put these regenerative principles into their business, and they wanted to have a compostable tea sachet. If you know anything about the packaging world, it's the materials all exist, but you just can't achieve the scale that you want to achieve price parity with single-use plastic, which is a byproduct of petroleum. So it's a huge one to kind of take on. And so instead of individually, and this is, as a sustainable packaging provider, this is the number one thing. It's too expensive. We can't do it. We're going to lose our competition in the market because, that's going to just be way too expensive. They built a coalition and over 10 years developed a packaging, a fully compostable sachet. But that collaborative nature, because that, reduces the risk for everyone involved. So it's shared risk and reduced risk, and completely shared and multiply effect of gain. So I think that's a really simple and easy example, but I also see, there's a lot of regulation. I mean, if any business is trying to export to the EU has a suite of regulations coming in, whether it's with circularity, whether it's the EUDR, which is the deforestation regulation, and that's really affecting the global south because we are the raw material producers, and so we need to really think about how do we come together and say this is what is in our best interest and how do we actually meet these regulations. And if you start doing it now early as opposed to kind of reactive, and we're responsive and saying actually we want to push the frontier on this, we have the edge. And I think coming together in these coalitions, both regionally but also within our local markets, and saying these are actually the paradigm shifts we want to make, and staying ahead of kind of global regulation that's coming in. I think that's something that's happening and necessary. Another small example: I was on a policy dialogue for the deforestation regulation out of the EU, and the Indigenous Peoples Alliance was coming and saying we are the biggest representatives of smallholder farmers. We are the ones who are custodians of the forest, but it is also us who will deforest if you push us against the edge. What is in our best interest? And we don't want just cooperation. We want coordination. We don't want to just cooperate on what you're telling us. We want to work together. We want partnerships. I think we need to start fostering those partnerships, the collaborations that to go forth. I think those are kind of some examples where policy, the intersection of policy, but also kind of what is needed and businesses coming together.
And I think one of the key points there is this idea of nature positivity should not be a competitive differentiator.
Yes.
Right? Because I think for some people, if they say, hey, you know what, if we can crack that nut and then market ourselves as the only, right? So in that sense, companies that lead the way, they'll step out there, they'll take the risks around trying to bring in circularity and regenerative concepts into their models. They'll make the investments ahead of others. But the real benefits will come when they say, hey, now that we have understood how to do this in a regenerative way, we're going to open source our findings, our research, our models, so that others can adapt. So in a way, they're leading a movement.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the benefits of some of the companies we work with, right? Randhula, you're quite familiar with Serendipol, out of Kuliapitia, the world's, again, first regeneratively certified organic coconut brand.
First and only
at the moment.
Amazing.
And, they are working on right now 10 different model farms.
Right.
So the 10 different plots, they're working with the CRI. And when the results are out, where they can show the benefits and the impact, particularly also on biodiversity, they're ready to then release those results and share those models. So that anybody in the coconut sector can look at that and adopt those models, right? The other thing that, Savera, you'll be interested, we're going to work with them on is a biodiversity index for coconut plantations, right? So, and that may very well be the world's first biodiversity index for coconut plantations. Once that's created, and, again, there are some amazing people to work with out of our universities, and we're going to collaborate with them to do it. Again, that will be open. And then others can use it, tweak it, adjust it to their own plantations, their soil conditions. But this information is meant to be shared.
Yes.
So that this movement builds, right? So that's the kind of thinking that I hope more and more of our business leaders are ready to adapt, because a bunch of our folks have adopted and are having very good models, but somehow it's still seen then as a differentiator for the company.
Yes.
And I think the idea is it should be a differentiator for the country.
Exactly.
Absolutely. I mean, and moving beyond, just this notion of like reversing nature loss, like putting an index into your plantation and, embedding it within the performance metrics of your company. That's what gets you to not just mitigation, but nature positivity, right? Like that's what we want.
Yes.
And I think one way to absolutely do it is to take that and say, hey, how does everyone else do it? We're figuring it out because we want to do that, but how do we kind of replicate this and then bring everyone along? And I think there's a really good example called Zebras Unite, and it's a bunch of social enterprises that come together and say, that are moving away from this kind of unicorn mentality of, we have to be the number one, we have to be the best, we have to break and, compete with everyone and emerge as this unique thing that no one can become. Instead of saying, no, actually, we're zebras that move in a dazzle, we move together, we share our impact and we share our movement. And I think that's how nature works. And I think whenever we come up with a complex problem, I think for me at least, it's turn to nature. It's been solved before, it's been done before, and they're doing this in a way that they can hold all of the support for all of these SMEs together. And we've talked about it in depth. How do SMEs come together and support each other, share resources when necessary across sectors, and I think that's what nature positivity is, right? Because we're saying this is our shared goal. How do we get it? What are our shared resources? How do we move together? And I was listening to that panel with Serendipore where they said, we don't look at anyone in Sri Lanka as a competitor.
Absolutely. As long as it comes to Sri
running
Lanka,
partner.
we have won.
Yes, we're running partner. As long as we can bring it to, and that's the mentality we need. And I think a lot of the social enterprise space is full of that. But how do we put in the right policies? How do we put in the right institutions to actually allow that to coalesce, build the banks of the river so it'll flow better?
Yeah. And I think the very essence of, our past 15 minutes of the conversation has been collaboration, partnership, and deepening relationships in order to really grow the pie, or in order to really conquer the challenges that we have in front of us, which is common to all of us. And it's not just a singular business challenge, but it's a challenge that we created together that we need to solve together. And in that, I absolutely loved your zebra example also, because zebras, I don't know where I picked this up from, their coat outside, the fur outside, is a reflection of their skin as well. So they're black and white stripes. So it's inside out.
Yes.
Right? It's not just a
love
layer
that.
or packaging outside. Because right now, when we talk about nature positivity, there's a lot of greenwashing also that happens in the name of nature positivity, in the name of sustainability. And this also shies away a lot of people from stepping up to say, this is our best practice, this is what we want to share with the world, and rather keep it under their periphery so that nobody else misuses it to greenwash. So I think we need to really flip the conversation and the dialogue into reimagining the way we do business as a whole when we talk about business models.
I think truly asking, why are we doing this? Like, it sounds great. I think now it's come to a point where everyone wants to be green and everyone wants to be nature something. But I think asking ourselves why we're doing this, if it is to get a competitive edge, that's a trend. That's going to be pretty short-lived. But if we're doing this as a collective, we know that this is best for our nation, but also our survival as a species not the species on the planet. I think that's when then we can untap a lot more if we collaborate in that way. Because right now, you see the technology, the frontiers of humanity being pushed, but it's always the individual business trying to do that. What could happen if businesses work together? And you only see positive examples when they do, with the rare occasions that they do. So I think that's what, as a nation, that's what we need to start asking, is how do we work together better? How do we not, do something, but with the fear that someone else is going to come and steal my idea or take it away and say, no, actually, if you do this and I do this and, your next 3 people in your network do this, we're all going to win. And then again, the policies need to really nurture hold that together.
And I recently heard somebody say doing business in Sri Lanka is like swimming in tar. And in that context, we are talking
Sounds
about...
painful, yes.
And in that context, we are talking about one more thing now, nature positive business models. And now at a point in time where we are enduring the debt crisis upon our shoulders as people in the private sector. So in this context, Arj and Savera, both for you, this question, what specific challenges have you both observed in a local context that perhaps, Savera, you can speak more towards startups, and Arj, you can talk about SMEs a little bit. What do organizations or companies trying to adapt nature positive models or approaches, what kind of challenges do they encounter when they're working in our Sri Lankan context?
I think one, always the question comes up, how do we raise funding, right? Because there's a certain expectation, or we are always coming up against the venture capitalist or the private equity investor that wants their 25 to 30% IRR return, and they want a clear exit in 6 to 7 years. Those are, again, the more from that traditional or even the extractive mindset, that they are trying to figure out, how do I fund my business when what I'm in business for is quite different. I'm going to make a profit, but I'm also going to have all of this benefit. Yes, you have sort of a class of, you could call them impact investors as well. But oftentimes even your impact investors are looking at 20% plus returns, right? So they're giving you a little bit, but not a lot. So that is always a challenge, right? How do you fund your business in a way that people resonate with the impact you're trying to create and what you're trying to put back? And as a result, they're willing to support you, right? So I think that's always been a challenge. I think the other one, Randhula, we keep seeing is market access, right? However good we are doing here, or whatever the product or service or solution, how do I get past the traditional gatekeepers and get access to end consumers or the customers who value what I'm talking about? And I think companies also realize digital is not a silver bullet. It doesn't just suddenly happen or make you accessible and available. There are still, you need to have either the deep pockets or the creativity and the partners to connect you, and finding the like-minded partners, right? Not the people who are telling you this is where you belong, this is your place.
Yes.
The ones who say, wow, I understand what you're trying to do, and I can take you to the people who will appreciate this. So those are really the challenges that we're seeing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Even with investment or as a business, it's the metrics, like the performance metrics, how a traditional business is valued has no space for impact, right? Even the impact investors will take your traditional investment model or investment thesis and slap on some impact. That doesn't truly value all of what you're doing. So I think that's something I truly struggled with as a business, both running an existing manufacturing business and then transitioning. And so what happened was I had to do all of these kind of auxiliary things just to get the people on board. Yes, we met the performance targets, but it wasn't captured as to how we did that, how we gave back to the community, how we involved the community, how we empowered all these side businesses just to support our business and vice versa. So I think one part of it is this performance metrics, and especially also as a startup, being a part of accelerators where they're saying, this is great. It's not a startup, it's some sort of movement. And I'm thinking, yes, exactly. I want everyone to come with me.
Yeah.
So I think that's one part of it is we don't really know when we talk about nature positive, we haven't really looked at how to measure that performance, how to value it. So I think that, and then that comes with everything from attracting institutional capital to, any even innovative model hasn't really truly allowed us to say, we are nature positive in this way, or we put nature at the core of our business. And that's, again, as I was saying, that accounting, how do you account for everything you're taking? And then how do you put that into your performance metrics? How do you integrate your metrics?
And Savera, I would say, even, one of the things we are looking to, again, working with Serendipol, is we're actually looking to completely invert our metrics to start with the impact metrics. Right. So impact metrics both around futures enabled, lives saved, lives changed, as well as the biodiversity impact. And then arrange or ensure that all of the other financial metrics, efficiency metrics, all are in the service of the impact
Right.
metrics,
Right.
right? So that's a
Yes.
real inversion
Yes.
of it to say this is why we're here. We're
Yeah.
here to make this impact. And therefore, our efficiency metric, for example, of let's say the number of coconuts we use to create a kilo of desiccated coconut. That's an efficiency metric that
Yes.
we will monitor. And if we can improve that, we can enable more futures.
Yes. Yes.
That's why we need to improve the efficiency metric, right?
Absolutely.
Or the cost,
Yes.
whatever. So that's a work in progress,
Yes.
and that's a risk.
Yes.
And then we have to be able to convince, the investors, the original founders, that this is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But we're willing to take that risk, and I think that's going to be an interesting work in progress. And hopefully, we'll have a discussion around it when it's done, and see how that plays out.
I was just going to say, I think that's the opportunity that has not actually been seen. And I saw that even just with the manufacturing operation, because, we were just trying to increase efficiency. But the way I wanted to do it was saying, how do we bring more women into this? More women meant that women voluntarily signed up, said, we want to do the night shift, but we don't feel safe to come. So then it started a whole conversation and a whole system of what are the local businesses that we can bring in to provide safe transport? Can we share that transport to lower the costs with the community?
Right.
The kids can go to school. And all of this happened. It just translated into our efficiency measures. But there's a huge all of these other opportunities that were created and vice versa. And I did it because I wanted to bring more women in. I did it because I wanted to engage with the community and give children more access to go to school. But it also translates into efficiency measures, So I think...
So it is good for business, right?
Yeah, it's good for business. And I think,
yeah,
exactly. And so now I think we're still looking at it as parallels, where we're looking at our traditional metrics and we're saying, okay, we'll do this too. And we're trying to stick them together. And I think we haven't really looked at this opportunity of, where one feeds the other really, where it is symbiotic. And I think the other big issue is that communication, because yes, it is all these market bottlenecks, market access, but I think communicating why you're doing what you're doing, and that's why I think you have to be truly a zebra on the inside and on the outside, and really, then your communication is authentic. But not just is your communication authentic, you're reaching the right people, and then maybe that collaboration comes in, because I know that someone who's buying, say, House of Lonali is a circular business, then I know that that demographic is also interested in, when they go to a cafe, they want something with less of a plastic footprint. I know that they want, if they're putting something on their body, they want it all natural, and they want serendipity, organic coconut oil. So, where is our shared customer base? How do we, instead of we all vying for our own customers and trying to find them, be like, this is one people, this is a lifestyle, this is a way we are moving. How do we share that? So I think, again, it all comes down to sharing resources, collaboration, but also looking at the untapped opportunities. I think we haven't really understood how to integrate these two things. We haven't really understood how to bring nature into our businesses in a way that we can actually meet a lot of the efficiency measures. We were trying to keep our water clean so we don't have to account for all the dyes that are going out. In doing that, we cut a lot of costs. There are just little things that in the cost-cutting measures, and the environment was saved, and in environmental measures, efficiency was saved. So I don't think we've looked at those opportunities enough, but I'm excited to see what you're doing with Serendipity. Keep us updated.
Will do.
And also, I think in our work at GoodLifeX, in trying to build this Thrive canvas, we've worked with about 6 companies piloting that, and looked at the 125 companies we've worked with in the past. And what we saw, Savera, is exactly what you described. People fighting the good fight, putting in a lot of effort, passion and resources, because it's the right thing to do, and they're driven to do that. But what lacked really was a systematic approach to bring it all together, to build nature as a part of the core business function.
Yes.
And flip the way business is just practiced and done already. And that's, I think, why structures like business models need to come into the mainstream, so that people understand that business can be a vehicle to convert the way that we work overall.
Coalitions, and that's where policy also can play a huge role. Right now, again, I'm quite excited by a lot of the EU regulation that's coming in. I think it's about time we create our own set of rules and norms and, not continue to follow the West, but in this particular thing, and possibly because it's been extractive for so long from the global South, they are at a position where they can put in these regulations. And, from greenwashing to claims to net zero, they're calling all of this out and putting the regulation in. We also need to start doing that. We need to start putting those policies in, but I think we can do it in a better way because we've had indigenous knowledge has done this for a long time. How do we work in communities? How do we, even in a harvest, how do we keep some for nature so that, you don't have a human-elephant conflict? Like they've always done that where they do the puja for the elephants. They keep some for, the birds and the elephants, and then you do the rest and you account for that. I think we need to start taking into some of that and putting that really into policy and saying, how do we do this in coalitions as a collective?
And I think where we lost our way, I'm speaking only in terms of Sri Lanka and perhaps the global South or South Asia, is we adopted the very extreme industrial ways of doing business very fast.
Yeah.
And now we are kind of, stopping and looking around us because places like EU are putting in these regulations, which are very aligned to what we used to be.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And now it's like a ring of a bell. People wake up to understand, oh my God, we've been just going down a path of destruction, whereas we were at the right point to begin with.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, what do we take from our past and how do we course correct so that we go back to what we know? And adapt it to the modern world.
And it's not a case of being pedantic, you don't have to say, we were great once and we were, it's about, yes. I mean, that's all we, can go on, it seems, but we have so much, IT capability of software development. We have the skill sets, but now can we bring nature into this and say, we can do this really well. We can leapfrog. And Sri Lanka, I kind of have this common understanding that Sri Lanka can leapfrog, right? It has everything it needs to leapfrog. And maybe at this juncture, we can say, really our greatest resource is our living ecology. Yeah. And I keep saying living ecology because I think, from colonial times, nature has been this separate thing. And so now we're like, oh, that separate thing that we kept separate, now let's bring it in.
Right
really,
to the heart.
But we are ecology. We are living ecology. How do we just acknowledge that?
And globally, what you see is there's been a loss of faith in most institutions, right? So most, whether it's political leadership, whether it's religious leadership, whether it's NGO sector, if you look at this study globally, and it's repeated year after year, right? And there's a clear loss of faith in, but business still remains the only entity that people still have faith that business can solve some of these most challenging issues, because there's a sense that there is efficiency motive and an ethical and a skill set that business can bring to the table to solve some of these problems. So again, that sense of the business models, and we can sit around and bemoan lack of leadership in our countries and all of the challenges and the mess that has led us to. But we do have the right talent. We have amazing talent within our business communities, both from startups to the very large corporates. And I think marshalling those resources and capabilities, and irrespective of what the political landscape plays out to be, to say this is the way forward, I think there's real opportunity there.
And every evolution that has happened and taken place in Sri Lanka has happened because the private sector actually pushed and pushed and pushed for it. And I think during COVID, the financial sector's evolution to everything that has really improved as a result really is because the private sector pushed through into innovate and into bring it to market. On that note, Arj, I'm also curious to understand, you work as an independent consultant to a lot of larger corporations as well. All of us here, I think, are on the same page on what needs to be done, how to do it, and why it's important. I'm curious how the bigger organizations, corporates in Sri Lanka responds to this. Do they understand the need? Are they ready to go on the path? What's your
So I
feel
think,
about it?
again, there's two parts to it. I think the larger corporates who are, let's say, primarily export oriented. They are coming up against both their customers and the regulations in the markets that they are looking to export to. So that is dictating a radical shift and changes, right? So they have to do a lot of proving their supply chain, cleaning it up, and ensuring that there is, at a minimum, no harm. I don't think they've got to the point of doing more good, right? But at a minimum, doing no harm, right? Companies that are more catering to or drawing from the domestic market, I think the pressure is less. So there is still a long ways to go. But having said that, again, one of our largest conglomerates, right? They, in their approach to business, they've done a few different things. One is they are very clear in their business models that they have inclusive supply chains. Right, so they will not go and put large capital and develop a huge infrastructure. They will work with smallholders. They will educate them, they'll give them the tools, and they will take that produce, for example, and then do the value addition in their factory. But very clear that they're having an inclusive supply chain. So thinking like that really helps, right? They will also, for example, invest in biodiversity parks in the middle of their factories. Right, to really both, and that's not just a signaling, right? Because they also want to show that the output from the factory is not harming the environment. That's a great way to showcase that. Yeah. But then also to really continue to show and invest, because that's a huge signal to their own people and then to their customers who come by. So there's a lot of that benefit that takes place as well. So there are large companies that can lead in this way. But, the most progressive models that we see obviously are smaller companies because they're starting from a different point.
Follow-up question, and in closing, how do we push the envelope so that business leaders that has influence and resources to make these changes perhaps faster than a smaller company actually make that choice?
So I think right now you can see they're putting out, for example, ESG frameworks and ESG commitments. Right, targets. For example, nature is not sitting at the boardroom at the moment, right? It's under kind of sustainability initiatives, or there's a head of sustainability, but that's not a board level decision-making authority.
Yeah.
So I think to push the envelope, just as much as we're saying, we're trying to diversify boardrooms, you also have to bring in nature and the community.
Yeah.
No, I think that's an interesting and challenging way, because even to find good people to diversify the boardrooms, it's a challenge, right? And they're working through it, but there's a long way to go. Yeah. Now we're saying bring nature into the boardroom as well. So how do you do that? I mean, the most progressive global companies are doing it. Yeah. And they are certainly parking decision-making authority with nonprofits that have a nature orientation, for example. So it can be done. Yeah. But you have to be willing to, and then you have to be willing to convince your investors that this is the right thing to do. Yes. Right. So that's partly the challenge. Yeah.
Savera, I want to pose a final question to you. You work locally and you're very, very connected to the local ecosystem, even though you're based outside now. And I would love to know from you, have you seen any locally applicable global trends that are now really popping up around Sri Lanka, which we can latch onto and actually kind of grow into?
I think, going off of Arj's point, and it's something that I see that really needs to happen, because the social enterprise ecosystem here is very progressive, I think. If you look at society as a whole across the board, it's not just Sri Lanka, it is the global market that has driven society, right? And so businesses are the ones that are going to make the biggest changes, and a lot of the way we exist and all of our decisions are based on what big companies, MNCs have sold us. I think there's a huge opportunity again for those partnerships. The way I look at it is like a huge ship can't go into a small cove and explore new frontiers, but these small SMEs can. If you have a lifeline, a thread of exchange where you say, okay, we will enable you to go and find out and find the new ways of doing things as a resource, and we exchange. And there's this, it's called the fringe effect. new and needed is happening on the fringe. How do you enable the fringe in a way? And I think that is, you don't see a lot of those partnerships, but you see some of those. And I think those are, I think that is a model that really needs to be explored more and really cultivated and nurtured. So I think, there are some collaborations that we see. I think Celine has some really good partnerships that are coming in, and they have a lot of really interesting technologies that they want to put out to the world. And, from our SME sector, there's blockchain transparency on their whole supply chain. Big, large corporations don't have that. How do you do it? How do you make that nimble? How do you achieve that agility? Those partnerships need to happen. And I think that's something that we're not seeing enough of. And even globally, you don't see enough of it, I think. And I think that's a really possible way for us to move forward. So that doesn't directly answer your question, but it's something that I've seen needs to happen. And the few times it does happen, both here and globally, it has really incredible effects and impacts. And I think that transparency is also necessary, from the Patagonias to all of these companies. Well, if you're really transparent about where you are, you can attract the other people who can say, we can help you get further. And that, I think, is not happening enough as well.
Fantastic. I think in summing up, what needs to be understood is this is no longer a nice to have. Nature positive business models are an absolute necessity, globally as well as for Sri Lanka. And I think Sri Lanka is in such a good place right now because of where we are in our economic crisis as well as financial crisis, to start afresh, to think afresh, to reimagine. I think partnerships is something that we all really agree on. Understanding, knowledge, and perhaps unlearning. Unlearning the paths and the methods that we've followed so far into reimagining what's ahead of us, and to double down and do it intently. So let's see how Sri Lankan companies can really learn more and perhaps even innovate more nature positive business models, and perhaps become a spotlight to our region in how we can reimagine an economy that is going to be nature positive.